March 15th was the anniversary of the day I got COVID. The blood just fell from my body, and I turned to my son and I said, something weird just happened. I believe I just got really sick. The meningitis was really frying my brain. The lungs were having issues. I had 103.7. My body was just shutting down. I had just had virus after virus after virus. My life will never be the same from that time. Hey everybody, it's me, the Einstein of Wall Street, here from the balcony. You know what, I'm feeling a little bit reminiscent. Okay, we are here in March. March 15th was the anniversary of the day I got COVID. March 15th, 2020. So that was 6 years ago. And I can remember it really well. My son and I were going to take a trip that my father and I had taken for 30, 40 years, every year, to go to Colorado to ski. And I was working here on the floor with my son, and March 15th came around, and if you'll remember, you know, February 19th or February 12th was the high of the market. And so there were a couple of weeks where the pandemic was starting to, it wasn't real yet. Nobody really knew what it was all about yet, but it was still the chatter, and the market was starting to fracture a little bit. And, you know, we were, if you go back to that time, it was a scary time. And, you know, everyone was considering, oh, we're not going to travel and we're not going to do this and that. And the market was going through what it was going through. And so we were reconsidering taking this trip, but it was really important, and I was going through a lot. My wife had been ill, and so there was that going on, and so we decide, okay, we're going to get on a plane and go for a short period of time to Colorado. And I get on we go to the airport, and I walk on the plane. And a woman is sitting in the seat, and as I go to sit down, she turns to me and says hello. And it was almost like that scene from The Green Mile, when the guy, remember when the locusts come out of his mouth. I suddenly felt this inundation of absolute poison come out of her mouth and on me. And I just suddenly, the blood just fell from my body, and I turned to my son and I said, something just happened, something weird just happened. I believe I just got really sick. And within an hour, I was already starting to have a temperature. It was literally that instant. It was as if you'll remember, there were some strains of COVID that were stronger than others. This was the first strain that was chock full of every possible poison. But it was sometimes you'd get it and you got sicker than other times. You remember that way back? This was almost like whatever version of COVID that she was carrying, and this was like the ultimate, because they tested the strain that I got, was the ultimate strain that had every possible virus in it, just hit me. And literally I was sick within an hour. And I went over and I covered myself and I sat down in the chair and I was going like, this feels really bad. And we end up flying to Colorado. We get to Colorado and it was already weird. People were just, we weren't sure if the mountain was going to stay open, and people didn't know what was going on. And, and we were getting our skis together, and we just really looking forward to a great time and everything. But there was already word about that if you'll remember, every hour things were changing. That when people were starting to understand what was going on with the virus and with the pandemic and all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't even a pandemic then. I think they declared the pandemic on that 15th, on that day. And it was probably irresponsible that we left in the first place, but we did. And so we get to Colorado, we're getting everything done, all excited to go skiing. And I can't remember now if we skied the first day and then they shut the mountain down, or it was just that night that they were going to close the mountain the next day. But I was already getting sick, like literally hour by hour. My temperature was going up. I was feeling really weak. I know we skied for one day. I think that was about it, because they ended up shutting the mountain down. It was a great day of skiing, but it was just like we went out to dinner and people were already, I ended up. Also, it turned out that the people we found this out months later, that the people serving us at the restaurant were tested positive. Months later, they came back at me on that stuff, but I knew that I was already had something when that woman just breathed on me. And we ended up, lucky enough to get a plane back to the States. New York Stock Exchange already at a testing center here. Came back in. I never even came down to the floor. I immediately went to the testing center, got tested. They sent me home. And it was not for a number of days. If you'll remember, it took sometimes 10 days, 3 weeks to really get confirm the diagnosis. But I knew I was sick, and back then people were like, I got literally isolated and shut down. They sealed my apartment in plastic. I mean, it was that crazy, and I'm reminiscent of it now because it's 6 years later, and it changed my life forever. My life will never be the same from that time. But I ended up getting meningitis along with the COVID. I had 103.7 for the 3.5 weeks. I was given a short 3 months to live at one point. They thought I lost a good part of my lower left lung. They did not think I was going to make it. And so I was sheltered in place in my apartment. I sent my family away. My son was here running the firm on the floor of the exchange. And I was in my apartment, locked down, literally sealed. No one could come near it. People were like dropping things off, many feet away just to try and give me some hot tea or something. And that isolation was starting to get to me. There's some videos out there that I made back then because I really started to feel I was being separated from society in a big way, because you're talking March 15th, like I was patient zero virtually. I mean, there were other people who got it. There were 900 to 1,000 people dying a day in New York City back then, right? And so my father was a very well-known doctor, and so, there was a question like, do I go to the hospital? Thousands of people were dying every day. No one who was going to the hospital was coming out alive. And so that was the question. And my father was a well-known doctor, so I had a wonderful crew. The stock exchange gave me 2 Chinese doctors just for me to take care of me and make sure I was okay. And they tried to give me all kinds of different medications and whatnot. And I had a crew of people who were watching over me, infectious disease guys, I had a team of 5, 6, 7 doctors. But probably within a week or 2 or 3 weeks, they had already said that they did not think that I was going to make it. But I still didn't go to the hospital because that was certain death. And it was really scary. It was scary, and now I think about it, I just get kind of teary-eyed because it was, my life, it changed my life forever. And I tried, my only connection to the outside world was social media. I started doing videos, just talking about life, talking about, empowerment, about motivation. There were a couple of people who came into my world around that time. David Meltzer being one of them. I did not know who he was. He's the guy they made the Jerry Maguire movie about. He was somebody who had seen the high highs of life and the low lows of life, and he his story popped up on my feed on Instagram, and I watched his incredibly inspirational story, and he ended up becoming one of my mentors and very close friends. And when I had done watching the story about him, I reached out to him. I didn't even realize back then you could reach out to people on social media when you saw them. And I just said, look, I'm sitting here. I'm actually considering, jumping out the window. It was that bad. I was having allergic reactions to some medication like gabapentin and all these neuro whatever kind of, they were trying to give me everything to try and get me to survive. And every possible thing they threw at me, it was not working. I was not getting any better. I was getting sicker every single day. But hearing his story was inspirational. It was a story of resilience, resilience of the spirit, of people who had really dug deep down and found some kind of a force in them that was going to make them survive against all odds, when everything looked really, really dark. And that's what happens when things look really dark. You need something that's going to just, move a muscle, change a thought type of a situation. Because you don't know, you're at the crossroads there. You could make a decision that will end your life, or you could make a decision that you're going to, keep moving, keep going, right? But the problem is that happens in normal life, that happens, and you're able to at least go outside and talk to people. I was in that situation. I was locked in at home, sheltered in place. I could not even leave the house. So I had my interaction with other humans was incredibly limited. And so it was just me and the friggin' phone in my apartment drinking the hot tea and with 103.7, knowing, they didn't even tell me that I had only a few weeks to live or a few months to live, whatever it was. I didn't know about that for a while. But, and then Wall Street Trapper came on my feed, and you know how Instagram is, they'll introduce you to people, and whatever it is, I never understand how that algo goes. But David Meltzer went on to become one of my closest friends, basically saved my life that night. And then Wall Street Trapper came on my feed. Now, there's a gentleman who was in prison for many, many years for, I guess, it was attempted murder or something, or a drug violation or something. And he had an amazing story about how, while in solitary, he had met which he did not do, had met a Ponzi scheme guy from Wall Street, and they hit it off. They ended up spending many, many years together in jail, and he taught him everything he knew about Wall Street. And he had a spiritual awakening of his own, right? He had grown up in the dark bowels of I guess, New Orleans, and with no opportunities, and he had bobbed and weaved his way into a serious jam, and gotten caught for whatever it was and sent to prison for a hard time, and he did hard time, but he was able to have that experience. Just this rings to mind for me that you never know when some opportunity is going to arise, when some situation, no coincidences, but it's like when a coincidence happens that you run into somebody. I always talk about it relative to what happened to me in financial crisis, 07, 08, 09, when I stopped making any money and my whole business had shut down, and I was lying in bed under the covers, having given up, wasn't making any money, didn't want to tell anybody my situation, and then one day I just decided that no opportunity was going to find me hiding under the covers in my apartment, right? That I was limiting the possibilities of my life changing, the trajectory of my life changing. I was basically shutting down any possibility I had to get better or to find some kind of a spiritual awakening. Because the spiritual awakenings don't come knocking on your door. You've got to go out and find them. But anyway, so going back to the story, so I'm sitting there and I hear Wall Street Trapper's story about meeting this guy and how it changed his life. They spent 10 years together in lockup, learning about what Wall Street people do. He had been, whoever the guy who he met was a bad egg. He was a Ponzi schemer, but he had told Trapper that you guys got it all wrong, alluding to the people who are on the street doing what they do on the street, and that you guys got the hustle, but you're doing it the wrong way. And then if you knew what us Wall Streeters, at least us crooked Wall Streeters, not us, of those crooked Wall Streeters do, then you could probably get over. And so Trap, heard the message. The message was to go out there, find the hustle, do it legitimately, do it legally, and that there's an opportunity out there if you do that. And so when he got out of prison, he ended up turning his whole life around, and he put together his team, and he's grown to be 10 million strong, and he's changed hundreds of thousands of people's lives, and brought incredible story, has told an amazing story and has created stories of people and stuff. And so those are my two mentors that really came out of that COVID experience. I mean, I had COVID. I did not test negative until June. And then I started suffering so I got meningitis. The meningitis had sucked all the fluid out of plus the COVID. COVID, one of the things COVID did was it dehydrated any organ that it attacked. And so I started losing use of my arms, right? So it turned out that it was attacking, the meningitis was really frying my brain. There was fluid on the brain. The lungs were having issues. I had 103.7. My body was just shutting down. I had just had virus after virus after virus. They turned out, once they tested the sequence, along the way I did meet this young lady who had been a virologist at Temple University. She had worked, I believe, in Wuhan. So she knew what was going on in China around viruses and stuff like that. And maybe a couple weeks into this experience, she called me. She said, "You don't know who I am, and you're probably going to think I'm completely out of my mind, but you are probably going to die. But I received a email with the sequence of the virus that you probably got," because she followed my story, because by then I was already a pretty well-known guy, and so the story got out all over the press. Fox News, every possible news agency was posting about the fact that Wall Street's most famous broker got COVID. He's been given a few months to live, and that the story does not look good. And then so she called me. A lot of people reached out. I had a huge following in China by that point. They were wanting to find out what the story was, and But this woman she was a virologist, so she was a doctor, and she reached out and she said, "Look, you don't know me, you think I'm nuts, but your life is about to change in a really bad way, and I'm going to be here for you, and you may never talk to me again, but you're in store for some bad shit." And so she kind of knew, that COVID had been put together, as like a man-made virus, and and that all the components of it were really fucked up, and that it was going to really mess me up, which it did. And so, wow, fucking crazy ass memory. So anyway, physically, from June until August, my body just started to shut down. I started losing use of most of my organs and most of my appendages. And by mid-July, I couldn't use my arms. My hands were pretty much useless, and I was still pretty sick. And I think I tested negative, but I ended up getting COVID again. Anyway, they decided that, and my cervical spine had literally just was fried. All of the vertebrae and the discs turned to basically to dust, and the vertebrae just collapsed on top of each other. And they realized that in order to preserve any kind of use of my appendages, that they were going to have to reconstruct my cervical spine using fusion and using screws and titanium rods and all this other shit. And so they did. They went in, and I found a doctor, Dr. Rue, and somebody who had, they've done fusions before, but, there was one guy who'd never done more than 3 fusions, and then 4-level fusions, and then 5, and I needed like a 7-level fusion, and no one had ever done that, but they knew that's what had to be done, and so he went out on a limb and he decided he could do it. And so I think I had, 5 or 6-level fusion to start. They ended up doing as many as, I think, 9 by the end of it. I had 7 surgeries. I had the first surgery, I think it was August 12th. Now think about that. The funny thing about August 12th was that COVID knocked the shit out of the market. By May 23rd, the market had sold off 10 plus 20%. They issued a stimulus package, $3 trillion thrown into the market over a 3-month period. If you go back to the financial crisis of 07, 08, they threw $800 billion into the market over 18 months. It took 9 years to get back to even. This time they learned their lesson and they threw $3 trillion into the market over 3 months, and we were back to even by August 12th. So around the time that I had my surgery, this market had gotten itself back to even. And I had my surgery, and they basically fused my whole cervical spine from C2 to C7 maybe or something. And I was in a neck brace. I went on to be in a neck brace for almost 5 years. But anyway, I got to go downstairs and work, but that was good.